right behind the shadow one. That card anymore. This movie is called The Nut Job.
Live, yeah. Have you got speakers there?
It's just on his way down to fix that.
Glen, CPC noise the hashtag, is it?
CPC@gmail.com. The hashtag is OBICPC. Hey, let's go. I'm kind of hearing it. It's almost as crazy as a marathon. We're going live now.
Sterling, you coward!
That Ben, exactly, yeah.
Heck of a day.
Now, Ben should be fantastic, good stuff. Okay, I'm going to start now. Talk to you. Best of luck. Cheers, bye. Danny, is there 2 links up on the internet?
Yeah, I don't know who made the second one.
So the one we've been putting out.
I've got the one called Free Open Access.
Okay, I've got Please Stand By. Please Stand By, starting soon. Is that us?
That's not the one I sent you. The one I sent you is up in the live.
Are you on the WhatsApp? Have you?
No, on the...
Send it to me in a message there, will you? I love technology, don't you? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome. Good to see you back. Didn't think you'd come back. We're just sorting out some technical issues at the moment. We'll it's kicking off now in about 2 seconds. It's 4 seconds here. Hold it for 4 seconds. There we go. If at any stage you think it's too much, just hand over to your man. Yeah? Danny, are you live there now? We're showing live, are we?
No, but I want to go and see my
Thank you. So we're just having an issue at the moment in some of the centres. We're just waiting for them to link in. If you just give us spare with us if you can, it'd be great.
23 watching now on the...
Will you keep the... Brilliant. Will you watch the internationals as well? You can, I'll show you in a second. Oh, you can see, you can link in to see who's watching internationally also. Do 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 do. Okay, good to go? All right. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're all very welcome to another night of FOMED, free open access medical education. I believe, I suppose I'm a bit biased, we have a great lineup of speakers tonight, starting with Katie Cooke and her mum Nicola, who you all seen the video of the last night. As you all know here, our kind of motto was inspired to be the best, and we showed you Katie's video of how inspirational it was in the last night as she ran the marathon. So Katie's going to go into a bit about that with her mum Nicola. And then she's followed on by Karen, who's involved in organ donation. It's in the back there. And then we're going to look at the beautiful Ben. Ben Heron's going to talk to us about lessons learned from the mountains that we can use on the streets. Okay? Just for a bit of housekeeping before we start, we've 20 centres linking in tonight. We've over 300 people registered on Eventbrite. Okay? I just want to mention them because without those and without you guys, this wouldn't happen. So we've RCSI, Clonmel College, Glen Mountain Rescue, Naas General Hospital, Letterkenny General Hospital, Mayo General Hospital, Tullamore, Waterford, National Ambulance Service College and Ballinasloe. The CF4 Killarney group is being joined by the Kerry Mountain Rescue group as well. We've got Dundalk, Wexford, Dublin Airport Fire Service are linking in, Dublin Fire Brigade, a couple of the stations are linking in. We've got New Ross, Cork City, Castletown Bear, Bandon, Trinity College Dublin. Students from there are also linking in. We've got the National Ambulance Training College in Tala. We're joined also by Eric Bauer from Flightbridge ED over in Ohio. And he's also being joined by the second shift, Mike Verkoust, and a couple of his colleagues over in the States who are very, very interested in the second presentation tonight that's being done. Internationally, we have people looking in from Sydney, Australia. We have Abu Dhabi and we have Saudi Arabia as well. Okay, so our small little theatre here in the middle of a small little island, the Irish Sea, is now broadcasting all over the world and broadcasting good, evidence-based, free open access medical education. So people around the world are learning from what we're doing here in Ireland. So it's a credit to everybody who gives their time up to come and speak. And so thanks very much. I also need to highlight that tonight SP Services have kindly stepped in and assisting us with some prizes to promote questions. All right. In all the centres around Ireland, if anybody has a question, you need to tweet it using the hashtag OBICPC. Your question will be asked here tonight, and there's 3 prizes put forward for 3 of the best questions from the night session. The last night, Stephen White, who joins us here, was the proud winner of a stethoscope, and then also Greg Prunty from Wicklow got a digital sphygmomanometer. Okay, so I'd like to thank Kevin on behalf of SP Services Ireland, who has kindly donated the prize, and SP Services Ireland, England and internationally have been tweeting about this conference. So the problem that we have is we don't know how many people are looking in, but we can look at it on YouTube and give us an idea from what countries they are. And they're thanks to our big organisation. National Ambulance Service has been tweeting about it, Dublin Fire Brigade has been tweeting about it, and some of the other people that link into us as well have been tweeting about it as well. So we're getting good following. As well as that, myself and Grania, because Grania does everything, I just do nothing, she does everything. Myself and Grania are going to do a study with regards to open access free medical education. How are you doing? Say hello to the world. The study is basically going to be about the uptake of CPC via social media. So we're looking at the amount of people that will who give up their time and attend events like this to see what they think of it, how we can improve, and see what the uptake is for CPC. Because EMTs currently in Ireland are the only group that are being kind of hammered as such with CPC. They're the ones that have to do a CPC return. But what's coming is advanced paramedics and paramedics shortly in the next 6 months will have to also do a portfolio return to FEC with regards to continuous professional competency and continuous professional development. What that will entail, I don't know yet. But I got an email this morning from Shane Knox, and anybody here who's with regards to the Irish College of Paramedics would have got an email saying that CPC is coming for all levels and you need to be prepared for it as well. All right? So, with that said, we are going to do a study and we're hopefully going to publish it. The reason I'm saying it to you is when we send the certs out for this session tonight, it'll also be accompanied with a survey by SurveyMonkey. We're sending it to you, OBICPC are sending it to you so we can look at what's happening and we can include it in our study. We're hoping to submit it for the EMS gathering, which leads me on to the next thing. I have to plug the EMS gathering happening in Killarney, 9th to the 10th of June. I hope everybody can get on board with that as well. If you haven't registered already, registration is there. Some great talks, some great speakers, and a great couple of days being organised as well. So we're hoping to submit it down there for the EMS gathering, our paper, if completed. We're almost there. We've got a few bits and pieces to do, but if you get a survey from us, we'd be very, very happy if you could fill it in and send it back. You're under no obligation to do it. If you choose to do it, you choose to do it, and that's great. Is that okay, everybody? Okay, great stuff. Thanks very much.
Sorry, Dan.
Yes, sir.
Sorry for the last one you should get.
Yes. Thank you very much. So all the certs for the last session were issued. If you haven't received the cert yet, there's been an issue with your email address. So in other words, the email address... Yep.
So the email address will be correct.
Okay, brilliant. Will you I'll sort it out for you, right? Because a few of them have been bouncing back, and we don't know why. Okay, we hit a button that sends out 750 invitations for anybody we have ever emailed at all. They get an invitation to tonight. But with some of the search, for some reason, they don't seem to be clicking in. But once I know about it, I'll get it sorted out for you. But thanks for letting me know. So anybody who hasn't got their cert yet for the previous night, or any other cert nights, you let me know if you can. Is that okay? Great stuff. So without further ado, I want to invite Nicola Cooke, who's Katie's mum, and she's going to come on and start tonight's first presentation. Give me 1 second, because you just seen it working there. Sure. This always happens. Nicola Cooke.
Thanks, everybody. It's been a while since I've talked about anything. Certainly nothing medically related, so I wanted to make it clear straight away that I'm not a healthcare worker. I'm a mum. I'm a mum to Katie and her brother William. But I have learned in the last 5 years, I've really dedicated myself to becoming Katie's expert carer. She has got a very aggressive, a dual epileptic condition, which results in about 10 or 15 generalised seizures in a 24-hour period. So I have had to learn a lot, and with the help of Epilepsy Ireland, I'm going to fly through 7 slides, because Katie really is the star of the show, and whom Glen was really wanted to come and meet you guys and talk about the marathon. So there's about, as you already know, I'm sure, 30 to 40, about 37,000 epileptic sufferers in Ireland, and about 30% of those are uncontrolled by anti-epileptic medication, and that's a refractory epileptic patient is known as those particular individuals. So also a lot of patients would fall into the category of no known cause for their epilepsy. There would be quite a high percentage of epileptic patients, with Katie being one of them, where the cause can't be found. It's not contained in the MRI or CAT scans, or indeed more sophisticated scans such as SPECT and PET. Katie's had them all. So a lot of patients will end up with no known reason or idiopathic no known cause for their epilepsy in Ireland. The types of epileptic seizures, which you're all also very well aware of, but which Katie would suffer from all of the above in a day, pretty much all of the above as well. So partial seizures that we would see around the house would be myoclonic jerks, where Katie's maybe perhaps 1 or 2 arms are jerking uncontrollably. The head could be nodding, and an uncontrollable sound will be coming as well vocally with that. There obviously are a litany of partial seizures out there that are still fairly hard to recognise for some people. Katie has been rendered blind, transiently blind on a number of occasions, but has been conscious and has been able to be aware to tell people, actually, this is a seizure. It may precede a strong smell or a warning aura, a seizure aura for her. And that would be a partial seizure, because their consciousness would remain intact. And there are a lot of other types of partial seizures. Complex partial seizures, while the consciousness might remain intact or maybe impaired, the awareness is definitely altered. For Katie, I suppose we could talk about a litany of events, hallucinatory. Some people have been known to, whilst in public, be wandering, be running aimlessly. Katie has been through situations like this. And it can be difficult to even gently, I suppose, restrain her. Last night, her eyes, it's always visible in the eyes, her eyes started rolling upwards, and she started wandering. And when I go near her, she'll be a little bit agitated, and she'll know that there is a presence there, but if I touch her, she'll start getting more agitated. So I'd follow her and watch for a generalised seizure to follow, because with Katie, generalised usually can follow from a complex partial seizure. The two categories that we would see with the generalised seizures are, and they're Katie's most common type of seizure, would be a drop seizure, an atonic drop. The eyes can either stare vacantly or roll up in the head. Katie's body will tend to go limp, and she will just fall, almost like an avatar that's had its plug literally ripped out. She will lie limp on the ground with the eyes fluttering and rolling for about a minute. You can see, her pallor is really good. Obviously, the amount of years that we've had stats machines hooked up to her throughout seizures. She's had thousands and thousands of them. Her heart remains good. Her stats remain good, and I can see this now in her pallor. I'm well used to her, what's going on with her. That can then turn into a tonic-clonic seizure, and usually does for Katie. She'll stiffen suddenly, and she will start shaking and convulsing. So she will have another minute usually of that, and that would be the most regular type of seizures that I would certainly be seeing with Katie. Epilepsy Ireland just asked me to show you that first aid slide. I'm sure it's all really, really obvious, but Katie herself will tell you she's come into many situations where people will try and restrain her, hold her down, hold her limbs down. Really, what I do is actually leave Katie. I don't put her in recovery position. I think what's most comfortable for Katie is not to touch her. She has been, even gently restraining can hurt the limbs. She'll come out because she's been so stiffened and find that it's hurt her, for somebody to be holding the limbs. It's not necessary unless the limbs are bashing off something, which, if you can't move it, it's really not necessary to hold somebody. I even find putting her in a recovery position is pointless half the time unless the seizure is actually finished, because she's going to be thrashing about a fair bit. But they are Epilepsy Ireland's guidelines, and any of the statistics I've put up there, if anyone wants a copy, I could email, also come from Epilepsy Ireland. This is a common event that we have had we've had about 35 emergency admissions, and with Katie's type of epilepsy, it's frontal lobe epilepsy that she has. In fact, two types of frontal lobe epilepsy that she has. We've had over 35 hospital admissions during the night when frontal lobe activity is really active. It tends to wake her up. We don't have alarms. I've basically, I suppose I'm in tune with the sounds of her seizures, and the apartment is built in such a way that the partition between my wall and her wall, I can hear seizures resolving. I don't get out of bed for seizures because I can hear them resolving with the breathing, with her breath after a seizure, and I will most certainly wake if there's unresolving seizures. They get louder. She is agitated. They tend to be clustered with Katie. It's not a continuous tonic-clonic phase, but it's agitation between tonic-clonics. So she may have a tonic-clonic space for about a minute, and then there will be certainly no regaining consciousness in between. Her awareness is diminished. She'll be agitated. She'll be drooling and grimacing, and then straight back into another tonic-clonic seizure. So once that goes on past, they say 5 minutes is the standard, I think, nowadays. If it's either a continuous seizure or a clustered of unresolving seizures, past 5 minutes is generally accepted as status epilepticus, and emergency medication is to be administered. We'll give buccal as the first line for treatment, and I'll give it in the cavity, but I'll usually end up giving intramuscular, and then I will actually usually end up calling an ambulance, and it's usually IV that will resolve it. The intramuscular has taken might take about 40 minutes, and really we need to be resolving things within the hour with her. So it's usually IV treatment and then into hospital where the blood's, she's basically obsed for about five hours, but everything, respiratory, heart, the bloods, everything in all those admissions have been good. The levels of the anti-epileptic medication would be a big question in a lot of these events. And I think I've put it there, yeah. Non-adherence for getting meds. But also with Katie, a large number of the reasons she would have ended up in hospital would have been the changing medications. So withdrawing from a certain medication, starting a new anti-epileptic medication would definitely have caused a lot of continuous problems, seizure problems for Katie. and definitely if there's been forgetfulness, it will result in one of these continuous events for Katie. There's obviously a litany of reasons: fever, illness, low blood sugars, alcohol is a big one, and drug ingestion, amongst other reasons. So I've gone through kind of the line that we would go through with the buccal am. The cavity, the buccal am myodosalam, has not been in the last, I suppose, number of occasions as effective as it was in the beginning. So it could be that she's had quite a lot of emergency treatments, that it's just become less effective. Or it could even be that, you know, she has been in a status situation for a long period. Sometimes she has been seizing for up to an hour before we've been getting proper, maybe emergency. And that comes from, I suppose, a confusion of diagnosis that she had when she was younger because of the aggressive epilepsy. She was diagnosed with epilepsy, but then also potentially additional seizures from non-epileptic disorder, whereas now she's been diagnosed with a dual epileptic condition, which is just epileptic, pure epileptic. So it can be complicated, as you can see. The treatment options Katie's been given, we've looked at, obviously, surgery. At the moment, she's not a surgical candidate. They have scanned her all over the place and they just cannot localise. It is probably genetic. It is probably a very rare epilepsy in terms of, you know, she has about 6 or 7 on the EEG, different types of seizures, certainly, that they've identified. Her last EEG had, in a 24-hour period, 30 seizures. 6 of them were different types of seizures. So she's very complex. But there are opportunities, I suppose, for certain candidates to have lobectomy, partial lobectomy, resectioning, if you can localise the exact area where, not just where the seizures start, but where they spread to as well, is very important. And the gold standard, I suppose, at the moment is still the EEG. We'd love to see the EEG being improved. We'd love to see ambulances carrying, like they do, ECGs. We'd love to see going forward an on-the-spot EEG, because it can be quite problematic in terms of, well, are we dealing with epilepsy? Are we dealing with, you know, something else? And we'd love all of those type of diagnostics to improve on an ambulatory basis. So VNS, sorry, I just skimmed over that. The vagal nerve stimulator is available, but has been a little bit, from the feedback we've got, has been, maybe the results have been a little bit disappointing in terms of controlling seizures in refractory patients. So I'm not sure what the exact statistics are, but I know that a number of neurologists would find that it's been a little bit more disappointing, the vagal nerve stimulator, than was originally expected a number of years ago. It's basically like a pacemaker box that goes into the chest, if some of you haven't heard about it, with wiring up to the vagal nerve. And it constantly sends a stream of electrical sensitive activity, which is supposed to prohibit the seizure's activity. But as I say, some people have found it useful, but not huge numbers. So for ourselves, we feel like there's been a lot of hope in terms of development in the surgical areas, and we'd love to see the diagnostic, the EEG, as I say, improving. It would be great to see ambulances carrying some of the skull caps that are available, and maybe, you know, some further research and opportunities might go into that area. We'd be quite interested in looking at the CBD therapy, which Katie and I have spent a lot of time looking at. The Epidiolex is available in the UK, and I believe maybe at trial stages soon for Dravet's and certain syndromes that would be quite severe in Ireland over the next 12 months or so. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that, because it seems to be quite effective, particularly when you're very sensitive to the anti-epileptic treatment, such as Katie is. So without further ado, I would like to hand you over to Katie to take you through, fresh from her win at the Slieve Bloom Mountains, the 5K race.
So just before Katie starts, I think you won't get a better insight into any medical procedure, any medical condition that coming direct from the horse's mouth. So this is one of the reasons why we're not saying you're a horse, by the way. This is one of the reasons we brought Katie on, is because you're getting a patient's view on the condition and how it happens. All right. So Katie, I'm delighted to have you here. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'm only sitting there with you. Okay.
Okay. Hi. Okay. So I was diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 9, and it was pretty tricky at the start. I mean, there was a few breakthrough seizures, but nothing major to compare to now. And it was okay for a while until I turned about 13 or 14, where hormones and everything came into place. And I was having medicine side effects along with breakthrough seizures during the week. So I was admitted to Crumlin Hospital, where they decided to load me with an epileptic drug and see how that would take its toll. Unfortunately, I do not remember the days that followed afterwards, and many more times like that continued, whereas a drug would be trialled and weeks later it just would have disastrous effects and I'd have to be taken off it. Even one drug trial I had, I think it was Lamictal, was it? It was Lamictal. I stopped walking afterwards. The medicine had such a drastic effect on my body that I lost the ability to hold up my trunk. So I was put in a wheelchair for a little bit. And another drug split the lining in my stomach, so eating and all that sort of thing I couldn't do that. I lost my appetite and a lot of weight. So that was Crumlin. The seizures were getting more frequent because I wasn't on any stable drugs. So they were about one every hour or so, you'd say, in a 24-hour period. And still the medicine wasn't helping, and Christmas had gone, my mom's birthday. And we were, yeah. And we were still sort of in Crumlin. So the doctors came up with a plan, which was solely psychological based, where it was like, we're going to try gain back your independence, but we're going to be tough about it and give you a bit of tough love and say, okay, you have this now, but this is what you're going to have to do to deal with it. So, next one. Oh, sorry, that was the slide I was supposed to show. Sorry, I hope that all made sense. Rehab. It was probably the most disgusting thing I've ever had to do. It was very painful. From the weight loss from one of the medications and not being able to use a trunk from another one, it was difficult. I had 2 physios that loved to shout at me in the morning, which was great. But thanks to them, like, obviously I'm here standing today and able to walk. I think it was my sheer stubbornness that probably got me through it. I don't like giving up, so that was something. And next one. As I was saying, the doctors were trying to give me somewhat of my independence back through psychology. They were putting in regimes where certain times during the week my mom wouldn't be able to come in and visit, whereas she would have to get me dressed, help in the wheelchair, help throughout the day. But a new treatment was put in place where sometimes she wouldn't be able to do that. I would have to try for myself, and because what they saw is this is what it was going to be for a long time. So we did that and we took it on board, and I kind of got a little slap for saying, this is what you just have to do now. Yeah, so I ran a marathon. It was a very random decision. Running has always helped me so much, and I recommend anyone who has an illness of any sort to try running. You can exert all your stress and troubles into just this one sport, and it's amazing, honestly. So after physio, I got back into the running, and it helped me like walk and do whatever else, but nothing serious until my neurologist, Dr. Colin Doherty, came to me and kindly was like, do you want to run a marathon? And I thought about it, and I kind of liked the title of marathon runner, so I was kind of like, I'll see. But the charity itself is amazing. It facilitates for all brain illnesses. He looks, I think it's the whole country he facilitates for, isn't it? St James's Hospital. He facilitates for the whole country for neurological diseases. And where you are put when you get there is a porta cabin, and it fits 3 people. And that always reminds me of the time where I was in a wheelchair and I had to go in for an appointment and it didn't fit through the door, so they had to carry me through the door, and that was it. The wheelchair couldn't even fit in the room. And it gets me thinking, for people who are paralysed, like, what are they supposed to do? Like, how are they supposed to feel safe? So I really thought about it, and I was like, no, I'm going to do it for this charity. It's a great charity. And later on I did more work for them, more campaigning, more events and stuff like that. The marathon itself was interesting, to say the least. I completed the full 42k in 4 hours and 11 minutes with 7 seizures. So that's something. Thank you. And I'd still hope to continue on with my work with Colin and James's and any other advocacy work that I've been doing. Next slide. So the future, well, it's not looking so grim as it was a couple of years ago. I am still having 15 seizures a day on average, but I'm not in a wheelchair. I'm here, I'm standing. I very much power through on everything that I can, and I believe that's what we should all do. If you can power on through, then I'd take that attitude. My hopes really are to hit my leaving cert in 7 weeks. Yeah. A bit of crack. And hopefully go on to college. I'm looking at sports courses and even the medical arena, and continue my advocacy work, hopefully. And yeah, that's me, pretty much. If there's any questions you would like to ask, I'm here. Thank you. Yeah, madam.
So, as I said, Katie's journey has been amazing, to say the least. There's so many things I suppose we can all kind of link in to listen to it. Where I came across Katie was driving her home one night, and she'd done an interview on the radio. I think was it Matt Cooper?
Yeah,
Matt Cooper. When I heard about this girl who had completed a marathon and had 7 seizures throughout it and got up and kept going, I kind of said, I want that girl on OBICPC nights, because inspirational figures, as I said before, are hard to find, and when you find someone that just doesn't give up, I think it's something we have to kind of take from it. So, from a medical professional, as we said from the start, neither of the previous speakers are medics or have a medical background, but their experience and their knowledge on the condition itself is second best to none. So, at this point, I'll open the questions to the floor. Is anyone like to ask Katie or her mum a question? Anything at all? Please excuse me while I check Twitter, because remember, #OBICPC and you get a prize for the best question.
Probably one of the things just with the marathon and the 7 seizures that we'd like to say, that not everybody who has even a generalised seizure can get up off the ground and not be in a post-ictal state. I think with frontal lobe epilepsy, from what my understanding is, from what I've read of the condition, is it can be very typical to have a quick recovery. A brief seizure and a quick recovery. So I'm not saying everybody with frontal lobe epilepsy will have a quick recovery, but Katie does have a very quick recovery after a seizure. It's instantaneous. What was I doing? And straight back in. So it's one of the things we'd see where she's communicating maybe with paramedics during the seizure. During the marathon, rather. I think herself and Colin ran into a few problems along the way with concerned people, particularly after seizure 7, that came quite close to seizure 6, and clusters can be quite common for Katie. And the two of them, Colin was fighting with somebody when Katie came out of the seizure, going, she's finishing, and she was like, I'm finishing, and she started running. So it's not. It can be quite unusual to see. I think after somebody falls over and shakes, it is an unusual enough. Common to frontal lobe epilepsy, but unusual enough, I think, in terms of people having convulsions. So I suppose we throw that out there as well.
Yeah.
I can't fail to mention Country Cottage Musing, who has a group of people in a cafe in Toronto watching in at this moment in time. So,
cute.
I know, yeah. What a name. So thank you, Country Cottage Musing, who are over there. So they've just tweeted in as well. So just bear with me 1 second. I just got to check the Twitter feed. Yes.
Our new flat screen TVs and laptops less of a trigger than the old ones.
Okay, that's from Garrod Oman. So Garrod is down in Tullamore. So he wants to know, are new flat screen, are they a bigger trigger than the older televisions, or does the television actually trigger your seizures?
Actually, there's two distinct types of different epilepsy, and then they kind of branch off. One is photosensitive, photosensitive, and mine is not at all. So I've never been affected by flashing lights, televisions, anything like that at all. Whereas the other side of the epilepsy would. I'm not sure about the new televisions. It could be. I know there's special types of technology on the iPads now for certain apps where they've been able to block it and stuff. But in terms of my epilepsy, no, I don't have that.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
In relation when you're doing your training,
Yeah.
how much does the percentage of seizures that you would get when you'd be doing your training, how much does it decline?
With, like, my heart elevates when I run a lot, and we think that is a trigger with my seizures. So it does help with strengthening and seizures and mentality, but on the other hand, it does cause more. So I would say I have about an extra 2 when I run, on top of, say, the 15 I have in like a daily period. On average, I'd say 4 when I go for a long run.
There's a balance between keeping her functioning, because her functioning was so poor so many years ago, and the running, I suppose, and the training. She had no function. She was in bed all day when we came out of hospital. She was a shadow of what you're looking at today. So she built that functioning up from going further and further away from the house each day, kind of a day at a time. But the running is just, you just couldn't put
The benefits of it
aside,
into it.
you really couldn't compare it to anything in terms of function, the benefits of function. But in terms of seizures, I don't think it has any benefit to the seizure threshold.
So I think we're going to finish up talk. I think this is Bubbles and Spice, at Bubbles and Spice. Katie is an absolutely amazing human being, such a strong person, running a marathon while going through 7 seizures. #epilepsy, best in the world. Okay, so with that, I say thanks very much, Katie. Thanks, Katie. So our next speaker is Miss Karen Healy. I don't know, do you go by any specific titles, Karen, or Miss Doctor, or Madam, or...
I don't mind the sounds, it's not Robert.
So, Karen Healy is, she's going to give you her actual title now in a second, as soon as we get over this technical problem here. Recently, the 2015 AHA guidelines, ILCOR guidelines, came out. And the emphasis has been put on organ donation and the access to organ donation and harvesting of organs in the community. And I kind of read it and I kind of went, well, is it pertinent here to Ireland? Where are we in Ireland with regards to organ donation? And for me, who follows FOMED and looks at or listens to a lot of the podcasts and stuff from around the world, they talk a lot about ECPR and talk about ECMO and a lot of other different things that happen. And I wanted to see, have we got those systems in place here in Ireland? We have a huge community of cardiac first responders who are currently being trained up and are trained up and give their time free of charge around the country. And this is the lessons that they're being taught. So I think from both the community first responder, the EMT, the EFR around the country, that if you are coming across a cardiac arrest, you need to be aware, if you are thinking about organ donation, where we stand in this country. And if, like me, you're listening to podcasts about what they're doing in other countries, you just need to be aware where we stand here. And there's no better person, I think, to talk about this than Karen Healy, because she's directly involved in the organ donation. So, Karen, you're very welcome, and thanks very much for coming, all right?
I suppose I just have to say it's a very hard act to follow. Katie, she's absolutely inspirational, but I'll try my best. So as Glen said, my name is Karen Healy and I am the organ donor nurse manager for Dublin North East RCSI Hospitals Group. So that's very long-winded, but basically what my role is, I work solely in education with ICU staff and A&E staff, and also I work with ICU staff who are looking after patients who are about to undergo brainstem testing and from there potentially becoming organ donors. And sometimes when the decision someone has been pronounced brainstem dead and the family may have some questions around organ donation before they can make that decision, I will get involved with the families and I will try and answer their questions as best as possible before they can reach a decision. And my area, there's 6 of us around the country, which I'll explain as I go further on, but my area is Connolly Hospital, Beaumont, who has 2 ICUs, Drogheda, Cavan and Temple Street. So ODTI, you may have heard about it, Organ Donation Transplant Ireland, and this is the organisation or the service who was given the job of taking over organ donation in Ireland on the 21st of April 2015. And the reason why it came about was, many of you probably know, organ donation was actually run out of Beaumont for 28 successful years, ran very well by Phyllis Cunningham and Aileen Coonahan and all those girls in the office, and they did a fantastic job. But part of their role, as well as being organ donor coordinators, was they also worked with the renal recipients. So after they parked the organ donation side of it, they got involved with calling the renal recipients in for and matching and looking after the renal recipients after that. And that's fine, but I suppose, you know, the European Union started looking at us, and this legislation that came into place and said that across Europe that you could not have donor coordinators who were in any way connected with the recipient patients. So it was seen as a conflict of interest, and certainly it wasn't in the way that the girls ran the service, but this EU law came, and so the HSE and the HPRA set up Organ Donation Transplant Ireland. It is run more or less the exact same, only it is a 24-hour, 365-day-a-year on-call service nationally. These 6 ladies would say they probably have the toughest part of the job, because they're the poor ladies who do the 24-hour on-call service. It's an 1890 number, and that's the number that either a medic or a nurse will pick up if they have a question in the middle of the night about whether they should approach a family about suitability for organ donation, or indeed if they have a family who would like to donate their loved one's organs. Then another layer to that is the 6 coordinators in the hospital groups, of which one I am, where I support families prior to making that decision, and the nursing staff and the medical staff looking after these patients. And with us, we have 6 part-time consultant intensivists with a special interest in organ donation, and they have the unfortunate title of being called clods, which is not, sounds quite derogatory. So currently in Ireland, you probably all know our system is an opt-in model. So this is through if you carry a donor card, you all see them in pharmacies and everything. The driver's licence, which is now a little bit not as obvious as the old one. The old one was a tick box at the back. Now if you go in to get your card, it's E115, 115 is the code actually, and you get that ticked and it's put on the back of your card of your driver's licence. At all times, obviously, the families are approached and consent is obtained from the next of kin. There's a lot of talk about, I suppose, the opt-out system, and that's what the current acting government, as we call them now, were looking to bring in initially before it all went to elections. And I suppose there's pros and cons to having registers, be them opt-in or opt-out, but if anything else, I suppose it brings up conversation, it brings up public awareness, and it starts that conversation. So the role of the coordinators in the ODTI, they run the donor referrals 365 days, 24 hours a day. They liaise with the recipient centres, so that's Vincent's, which do liver and will soon be doing pancreas, Beaumont, which do the kidneys, and the Martha, which do the cardiac and the lung transplants. They meet with the donor families to discuss the option of organ donation, and they complete the health and lifestyle questionnaire and consent. And the health and lifestyle questionnaire has always been there for when you donate blood or if you donate tissue like heart valves. And with this EU legislation, they also brought in that you need to do a health and lifestyle questionnaire if you donated organs. And that's just another detailed look at the patient's social history and medical history to give full information to the recipient centres to allow them to decide whether there is a risk to the recipient that they would potentially give the organs to. We're also involved in education of ICU and A&E. We provide debriefing opportunities for staff following donation, and everyone kind of, debriefing sometimes can be seen as people go, oh God, I don't really want to talk about it. But sometimes it's nice to just say, because I suppose we're very used to medical professionals, you know, we go out and we see something traumatic, and then you go home and you think about it and you come in the next day and it's a new day and there's new issues. So sometimes it's just nice to just take a minute and talk about the family and talk about how it upset you or what was said in the family, and to go back to the ICU nurses only see the trauma and the upset of these families, and they don't see the positives because they don't see the recipients obviously getting the organs. So it's nice to go back and say, because of this donation, this is who benefited by it. It raises the profile of organ donation, optimise organ procurement rates, and of course at all times it is so important to protect the interests of the donor families, because I can't say it enough, if we didn't have families making that decision to donate organs, we would not have a programme in Ireland. So how do you become a donor in Ireland? There are currently 2 types of donors. So you have your brainstem death donors and deceased cardiac donors. Both these type of patients have to be in ICU and they have to be on a ventilator. So your triggers for a brainstem dead donor. So you have a patient with a GCS of 3. You need to be sure that it is a definite GCS of 3. So you need to exclude drugs. So if someone's in and they've had some sort of intervention, they've been on sedation for a couple of days, sedation must be at least gone out of their system by 24 hours. You need to make sure that their blood levels are normal. That's not the reason what's putting the patient in a coma. And if you have someone who's in out of hospital cardiac arrest and you are cooling them according to the protocol, they need to be rewarmed. So everything needs to be within normal limits to say that that is why the GCS is because of brainstem death, not because of something else. Your pupils are fixed and dilated, fully ventilated with no spontaneous respirations, known cause of death. And again, that's important because when you give your information to the recipient centres, they need to know what the patient died from. So is there a risk that we could give this to the recipients? Because obviously they're going on immunosuppressant drugs so that they don't reject the organs. The criteria for organ donation has extended, I suppose. We were very strict once upon a time about our cut-off point. We would have said 70, 75 and was the cut-off point for being a donor. People are much more healthy. They're living longer. You know, you have 79, 80-year-olds who are cycling miles every day. So age is kind of no longer a factor. Everything is based on the patient's medical history, their social history and how they're doing at that time. And obviously your patient is for brainstem testing and that makes them a potential donor. Sorry, now I'm just going to have to take a drink. So in brainstem testing, the family will obviously be aware of the severity of the situation. So you're going to the family the day before, you're saying you feel that this person may be brainstem dead and you're turning off sedation and you're allowing them 24 hours before you test their brainstem reflexes. 2 tests are carried out by 2 independent doctors at 2 separate times. One must be a consultant and the second can be a registrar working in an acute setting for more than 5 years. And between each test the family will be spoken to, and that's just to start lodging the idea that this person is brainstem dead, that they are not going to recover. So it's feeding little pieces of information to them. It may be appropriate to introduce the potential for organ donation after the first set of tests when you say that this person has no brainstem reflexes and it looks like that they have died. The one question I always get asked is when is the most appropriate time to tell someone and when is the best time? And you know what, there's no black and white answer to that really. You have to gauge each family individually. You have to see whether they are accepting the fact that their loved one has passed away and that their brainstem dead. And then if they can get their head around that, then it's okay to potentially mention organ donation. But it is very important to note that the second set of tests, when the second set is done, this is the time of death. And then that is the appropriate time to talk about organ donation. So after the second set, the family are told that they now have a time of death and they're asked if they wish to proceed to organ donation. Quite a difficult concept for someone who doesn't have a medical background to understand. They look at their loved one and they're on a ventilator, they're breathing, they're warm, they have a heartbeat even though they have blood pressure, even though they might be on a lot of inotrope support. So it's a very difficult concept to get their head around. A lot of these patients then would be traumatic brain injuries, it would be falls or assaults. So if it is a coroner's case, then the coroner needs to be informed and they say his or her assent is sought. And that is so that we tell the coroner that this person is brainstem dead, the family would like them to be a donor, and obviously it would be the job of the coroner to prove a cause of death. So it's very important that we don't retrieve any organs that the coroner may need to make that diagnosis. It is very rare that a coroner will put restrictions, but if you had someone who maybe had a lot of thoracic injuries and was an assault, then he might say maybe that he wouldn't allow the heart and lungs to be retrieved, but you could take the liver and kidneys. So that's why we involve the coroner. So the sequence of events are the coordinator is contacted, the nurse or the doctor gives information around their admission details, their medical history, as well as their weight and height and their current blood levels. And the weight and height are particularly important for the matter team because the height is matched. So if someone is 164 centimetres, then that person can only donate to someone who's 164 centimetres. So the lung size has to be the same, and that's why the weight and height are very important to the cardiothoracic team. The recipient centres are contacted with the offer. The family will meet with the coordinator again, and then when the family are ready and the theatre are ready, then the patient is taken down, ventilated on inotropes down to theatre for retrieval. And the important thing to know is that an organ is not retrieved unless a recipient has been identified, and that often can take, through tissue typing and virology, it can take about 5 to 7 hours to do that process. So some families think when they've been told that their loved one has died and they have said they would like them to be an organ donor, they kind of think it can happen there and then. So it's important that they understand that we have to make sure that we have a potential match for this person's organs before we retrieve them. So deceased cardiac donors are the other type of donors that we do in Ireland. They're also called non-heart beating donors or deceased circulatory death donors. And these occur when a patient donates their organs following the determination of death by cardiorespiratory criteria. And until 2011, donation after brain death accounted for all the cadaveric organs donated within the Republic of Ireland. And I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but actually the person who started deceased cardiac donation again in Ireland was James O'Rourke, who is a brilliant lead intensivist and consultant in Beaumont Hospital. And he had the misfortune to have a friend whose son attempted suicide and was a hypoxic brain injury brought into the hospital. And he wasn't going to meet brainstem criteria, so the decision was made to withdraw care. And he turned to him and he just said, I really wish we could donate his organs because we would get something positive out of this. And that's what actually drove James to set up the programme. Currently, we do them in Beaumont Hospital. They have done a few in Vincent's and they've done a few in Crumlin, but really they're the only hospitals that have been involved so far. These potential non-heart beating donors may be divided into 5 categories known as the Maastricht classification. So category 1 are patients who arrive into A&E dead. Category 2 and 5 are patients in whom resuscitation has been attempted but are pronounced dead following unsuccessful resuscitation. So either an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest or someone in hospital and they've had a cardiac arrest. The current guidelines we use in Ireland include patients in category 3 and 4 only. So category 3 are patients who have a devastating non-recoverable neurological injury, usually secondary to a traumatic brain injury, but occasionally due to a hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. So these are patients who have potentially maybe attempted suicide or an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Category 4 are patients who are likely to fulfil the criteria for brainstem death, but they're too hemodynamically unstable or death is imminent. And previous to 2011, these patients would have been on high oxygen and high inotrope support, and we might not have been able to test them, and these would have been patients we would have traditionally withdrawn care on and not gone through the formal process of brainstem testing. So in the case of these patients, a decision is redirected towards comfort measures, and that's only done by the admission consultant and ICU consultant. So they're the people looking after this patient, and they decide that continuing treatment is futile and that they're heading towards withdrawal of care. If at that stage the patient is deemed a potential candidate for donation, then a further independent opinion has to be sought to determine futility of care. So this has to be done usually by a neurology doctor, and it's just to show that it's an independent person to the process that agrees with the fact that continuing treatment is futile. So family have a discussion regarding redirection of care towards palliative measures, and that's very straight, and that's the only conversation you have with them initially. And at that stage, sometimes people will bring up the conversation around organ donation, or you may explore it with them and see what their wishes are. If they feel they'd like to continue towards organ donation, then it's referred to Organ Donation Transplant Ireland and the relevant process is put in place. And I suppose it's important to say that with the brainstem dead patients who are coroner's cases, then certainly we will be contacting the coroner, but very often these patients were withdrawal of care, and while they would not have maybe on the face of it been a coroner's case, we would have referred them to the coroner because we needed to be very clear about that, continuing treatment is futile and that organ donation is an option, that they're very separate and that we're not saying it's futile because we think there are potential for organ donation. So there's a designated time for withdrawal of ventilatory support, so it's all really controlled. In the presence of the patient's family, life-sustaining treatment is withdrawn. Then there's a time period allowed for the patient to go into asystole, and that's determined by the transplant teams. And the reason why they determine that is once you start to drop your saturations below 40 or your systolic below 40, what they call warm ischemic time sets into your organs. So if you have an older person, the transplant teams might be anxious to wait only 30 minutes or 45 minutes. If you have a younger person, they may wait up until 90 minutes for the patient to go to asystole. Death is confirmed by cardiorespiratory criteria after a 5-minute period of monitored asystole. And then for the second 5-minute stand-down time, the patient can be transferred to theatre and they can be put on the table and draped, but you do not start theatre until that second 5-minute stand-down time. And actually, I think sometimes for healthcare professionals, it's kind of harder for us to get our head around it because it's not a very clear and cut case of someone being dead. This is someone who still has some form of reflex. They might have a cough or a gag, or they might be taking some breaths on the ventilator. But for families, it's actually easier for them to get their head around it because they are there present with their loved one when the patient's heart stops beating. So our figures for the last 2 years, so we had 63 donors resulting in 251 transplants in 2014, and we had 81 donors resulting in 233 transplants in 2015. There were approximately 550 people in Ireland awaiting life-saving heart, lung, liver, kidneys and pancreas transplant. And thanks to the gift of organ donation, well over 3,000 people in Ireland are currently enjoying extended life. Strange Boat Donor Foundation was something that was set up to support donor families. And this actually was set up by an absolutely amazing couple, which some people may know, called Martina and Dennis Goggin. And back in 2006, Martina and Dennis had the misfortune to lose their only child, Eamon, in an RTA. He was coming home one night, he was the front seat passenger with a gang of boys in the car, and they all walked away except him. And a couple of the things about Martina's story, and I'm sure some people may have heard her talk, she talks absolutely everywhere. But a couple of weeks prior to him having the accident, they were driving along in the car and there was an ad about organ donation and awareness. And she turned to him and she said, if I was ever in that situation, I would be an organ donor. And he said, God, me too, ma'am. So they'd had that conversation, but she was in ICU, she was absolutely distraught and her only child was dying. And that conversation never entered her head until a nurse actually asked her about organ donation. And she said that is so important. Yes, they'd had the conversation, but her whole world had collapsed and she couldn't remember having that conversation. So they have set up a gorgeous garden of remembrance, and it's on the Salt Hill Promenade between Galway Bay and the Galway Bay Hotel and the Salt Hill Hotel. And it has, it's a remembrance garden to everyone who's ever been an organ donor. They have stones from everywhere in Ireland, they have stones from America and France and Australia and wherever there's been donors, and they've had it brought and put in on it, and it's pretty amazing. And they also have a website, and on that website actually there's stories from families who were donors, and there's facts and figures about transplantation for people maybe awaiting organ donation. Interestingly, there was an MRBI poll conducted for the ODPI last year in March, and it was to look at the evidence of the level of public support for organ donation. So 1,000 respondents took part in phone interviews. 85% of respondents are willing to donate their organs. Just 50% have discussed their wishes with their families. And that actually is a very strong message, because sometimes family grasp with trying to decide what it is they would or wouldn't have. So I suppose we're all very aware of organ donation, but it's very hard to have that conversation. So I just want to finish up, I suppose, by saying organ donation should be considered as part of end-of-life care in the ICU where applicable. And as healthcare practitioners, we must be prepared to discuss and explore patients' wishes around organ donation. Thank you.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Ben if you want to come down and get set up now, and then we can go on to it. So there's a lot of stuff happening on the Twitter. Karen, thanks very, very much for that. I'm going to ask you to step out here and we can have a chat from out here. Don't go running. No, come over here to me. Come over here to me. All right? Yeah, I know you were. And Karen's mammy actually brought her tonight, so it's great. Thanks, Karen's mum, for letting her come out tonight. Any questions from the audience with regards to anything to do up the back there?
Just for the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest patient, what is the timeline from arrest to organ donation if the patient has had a ROSC? With new drugs being used in the ROSC?
So the timeline from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest for organ donation with a ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation, with the amount of drug, with the drugs after drugs have been given through ACLS, pre-hospital.
Yeah, before the drugs or organs can be taken.
Before organs can be taken.
Actually, the patients, so you're talking about deceased cardiac donors really, maybe who's some sort of brain reflex, and actually those patients usually end up being in ICU for longer than the brainstem death donors, because after 24 hours of withdrawal of your sedation and everything, you can go ahead and test. But these patients, you need to be very, very sure, obviously, that they are not going to recover. So usually these patients are multiple days, as much as 3, 4, 5, 6 days in ICU with no sign of gaining any more reflexes while not on sedation or any other sedative type drugs, have had CT scans and MRIs and everything. So it's their stay actually is long. It takes longer to get those organs for you to make.
Cut off the point where you're no longer viable.
Well, you see, once you hit into, it's like I said, once your saturation levels are low and your systolic pressures are low, then you're talking about warm ischemic time. So I suppose there's no blanket rule to it. So every patient is looked at individually, and they're looked at, so if younger donors could probably take lower systolics than an older patient. So really, we never make blanket decisions on anyone, and we allow that to go to the recipient centres. Because I suppose at the end of the day, one of the big things that happened in Ireland is the government used to give billions of euro across to England to take over our adult patients for heart and lung transplants. And that service has come back into Ireland, and the money has been put into the matter, rightly so. But the thing is, our adult patients are dependent on the pool in Ireland mainly now. So I suppose the lung patients and cardiac patients are sicker, and they're in hospital patients. So it's about weighing up who will be a potential match and how sick are they, and is this their last chance?
Okay.
Sorry, in the presence of a patient carrying an organ donor card, can the family object in the event of a death to having the organs donated?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, not too long ago, when I worked as an ICU nurse manager, I had a case where I had a gentleman and he had 7 children, and he was a blood donor and a very pro organ donation. And when brainstem death was pronounced and we had that conversation with them, they were like, oh my God, he would so want to do this, and he donated blood, and he was really pro it. So going in to have that family meeting, this was individually with his kids coming up saying it to me, and his wife had said, yeah, absolutely, he was a blood donor. And when we went in to have a family meeting and the doctor mentioned organ donation, his wife looked at the kids and they went down across the room, and one child, who was the youngest and actually was still living at home, absolutely no way, couldn't handle it, couldn't think about it, didn't want to go there. And that family then decided that they wouldn't go ahead, because at the end of the day, I suppose these are walking away with the decisions that made it end of life. They're the ones that are looking at each other on a Sunday across the table, and if everybody can't come on board with it, then we don't do it.
Okay, so up the back here, sorry.
If someone has received an organ themselves throughout their lifetime, can they actually donate?
Yes, yeah. And unfortunately last year we had that scenario with someone who had received a heart transplant, and she had a brain hemorrhage and she went on to be a donor.
So just in case the other people hasn't heard, a great question, if somebody has received an organ transplant already, can they actually donate themselves? And the answer is yes, they can.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I suppose that's important too, because sometimes we think someone has to be very fit and healthy in ICU to be a donor, but you could have someone in renal failure getting dialysis in ICU and they can still be a donor, because obviously not their kidneys, but they can donate their other organs.
How long on average are people waiting on the organ donation, or is it
It's actually, yeah, that's it exactly. There's different timelines. You know, it's more or less kind of months really to a year for the lung and the heart patients. But in Ireland, as you can see, we kind of do about, you know, kind of anywhere between 150, 200 kidney transplants a year. And yes, the living related programme is up and running in Beaumont now, which is helping a little bit, that people are not waiting for it. But they can be waiting, particularly if you're a blood group O, which is the most common blood group, you can be waiting anywhere between 5 and 7 years for a kidney.
So I just want to have a look at some of the questions coming in, if that's okay.
Yeah.
You're doing really well. John Shelvin gave a question with regards to the midazolam. This is not for you, and this is in regards to Katie and John. Unfortunately, Katie's had to leave us. She's gone off for a Japanese with her mum. It's a bit of a treat her mum was giving her after tonight. So I'm going to send your question on. John, say, Mammy, let's take her off for something to eat now. Follow the thing. John Shelvin said, intramuscular administration of midaz, the site, the scale of difficulty in administration of an actively seizing patient, Nicola's experience and the above. We'll send that on to her as well. Hello to everyone in Tullamore. Hello to everyone in Brian Jackman down in Wexford. Fantastic stubbornness, fair play to both. Jason Nevin has asked from Clonmel, has Katie considered going to the US for cannabinoid treatment? I had a quick chat with Katie outside before she ran off with regards to the use of cannabinoids for the treatment of the seizures. What they said is it is in use in the US, it is in use in the UK, it's not here yet. There is great research into it and they are waiting for it to come here, but it's a bit of an topic that has to be discussed. Okay, so she's going to give me an answer and I'm going to tweet it on the Twitter from the OBICPC. We were at OBICPC, time to catch the MSSI, yeah, very good. Do you know anything about cannabinoid scrums? Again, I'll put that to her. What an amazing young lady, good luck in the leave insert. Now, great to see Karen Healy up now. Question, should pre-hospital, this is from Gráinne Ryan, who's down in Tullamore, or down in Clonmel, should pre-hospital personnel be checking for organ donation cards, i.e. the driver's licence or anything else from the phone, and should it be a tick box on our PCRs? So PCR is a patient care report form that we would give when we bring it.
I suppose we are not as advanced as that yet in Ireland, and what we would say is, because sometimes we would get calls from people on a ward who maybe be dying of a chronic illness who would say, I really wanted to be an organ donor. And what we say currently is that it is unethical to intubate anybody or, you know, to increase management in a patient solely to be an organ donor.
So do you feel, I mean, I think we all know the patient care report form is going through a bit of a review at the moment. They're looking to improve it. National Ambulance Service has brought out a template for the possible new patient care report form and they're going to trial that and see how it's going. We're a long time using that particular form in terms of change, so maybe we'll put that up to at DFB and at NAS that they might have a look at it, possibly putting it on the PCR. Would it make a difference in resus if we did? If someone came into the research department, do you think currently as it stands to help you do your job, would it make a difference that's recorded before they arrive?
Yeah, I suppose we're going into A&Es now and we're trying to educate people around that conversation because, you know, we have such a demand on our ICU beds that sometimes we can have consultants who will come down and say, no, look, this person looks like they're not going to survive, not giving up an ICU bed to this patient. So I suppose if you had a patient, thank you, if you had a patient in A&E who you had intubated and you were actively resuscitating and you knew that their wishes were to be an organ donor, I think that's a totally different conversation you could have with the ICU team then about taking them in.
Okay. Just get your breath there. Is there a role for ECMO in organ donation? From Padraig Glen in Galway.
Yeah, well, currently I suppose there is lots of different ways to increase organ donors in Ireland, and actually one of the things, the EVLP is what they use now in the matter. So patients who maybe might have had had been chronic smokers or may have some aspiration on chest X-ray and they mightn't have in the past considered as organ donors, they're coming out now and they're actively, they're putting these patients on the machine, they're taking them back to the matter, they're recruiting them, they're giving them antibiotics, they're bronching them.
Okay.
And that's something that's up and running in the matter.
That's in the matter, okay.
Yeah.
Hi to all in Naas Hospital, says thanks for a great talk. Jason McKenna has come in and said, I'm a kidney transplant recipient, and Jason is tweeting a lot, and I will be in favour of an opt-out system. And that's a person from his.
The opt-out system is good because I suppose it's very cut and dry then if you have someone who says, I do not want to be an organ donor. But I suppose if you have a very strict register, I think like they have in England, and someone has if someone has not put themselves on the register, and then you're kind of saying, well, okay, you know, they obviously did want to be a donor, but then you have 19-year-olds that say, oh my God, I definitely would not like to be an organ donor, and then when they hit 40, they might change their mind, but have never gone back and changed their expressed wish on the. But I mean, I think the thing about these registers is it's sparking conversation.
Excellent. Matt Peters came in with a similar question that came from up the back there, so that's been answered there. Brendan O'Shea is taking a study break from his EMT notes and says thanks so much for a great night. Alan Batt, great talk, Karen. Letter in press with transplantation, urgent conversation that needs to happen. Internationally, as I said tonight, we've people looking in from all over the world on this particular talk to see what we're doing here, because they're having debates about organ donation pre-hospital. Because not many people would be aware of the level of care pre-hospitally now, with regards to intubation, with regards to ROSCs, the number of ROSCs that we're getting, mechanical CPR devices where we're actually able to perfuse patients and keep them perfused using mechanical CPR devices, which allows us to have a system that's not where, like, pre-hospital seems to be ahead, where the organ donation just seems to be lagging a little behind.
Yeah, and I suppose the service has only gone solely to organ donation and transplantation in you know, just hitting now 12 months now. And I suppose we are attempting to base ourselves on the Spanish model, who have huge numbers and they have huge infrastructure invested in it, but we're only just starting. But I think eventually that certainly is the way that we're heading.
Bubbles and Spice says, does the same restrictions apply to organ donation as to blood donation? For example, the places people have lived, etc., overseas for certain
period? Believe it or not, no.
No, that's a no on
and
that.
Everyone always says to me, you know, I lived in England and I can't donate blood, so I can't be an organ donor. That's actually not true. The blood donation and tissue donation is much, much stricter than organ donation.
Okay, we're nearly there. Colin Pettigrew says, if donor was a smoker, are any organs usable for organ donation?
Every single one of them, including their lungs. And that's why I said maybe in the past when someone would have been a heavy smoker and would have had infiltrates and maybe, you know, their lungs might have looked as healthy as someone who's a non-smoker, now the matter have this EVLP machine in which they can recruit them, they can bronch them, and they can give the lungs direct antibiotic access before they transplant them.
Galway comes back and says, a great talk, Karen, thank you very much on organ donation, it's very, very informative. That's in Padraig Glen at the National Ambulance Service College. Is there any age limit for recipients?
Oh yes, there is, and that's decided at the recipient centres. But that's down to the recipient.
So Padraig must have been listening to you as well. He's asked the same question you asked in regards to the if I want to donate and my family object, what happens? So that's been answered there. There's one or two coming in from the site. We're almost there. I'll just finish with these two and I can give you the rest of them then as well. We can go through them, so just bear with me 1 second. So from Dundalk, Mark Toner's up in Dundalk up there. What is the maximum time frame for organ harvesting? Have we answered that?
Well, I suppose, there's two different, I mean, if you're talking about actually retrieval of organs, and you see on about theatre time, or is there any about when you can actually take?
I think it's the same as what Fred was asking about the time, you know, it comes back to the same thing.
You see, the thing is, it depends on the age of the patient and what their, you know, what their blood pressure is like and what their saturations are like, because that will determine the kind of scheme of times they're talking.
Okay, what happens if autopsy would be routine but organs are viable? May have been answered, but we lost the feed for a few minutes in Cork City Red Cross.
So I think maybe what they're asking is if the patient is a coroner's case.
Yes, I think we've answered that. Yeah. I was recently at a meeting where we were discussing this, and one of the, I suppose we have a bit of a gun issue at the moment around the country, and some of the people who are being involved in these crimes are young, fit males who have, our bodies are in excellent condition. So I know from a previous experience of mine where we walked on scene and just seen an injury which we thought was injury incompatible with life. Now where we are, the possibility of harvesting 6 or 7 organs from somebody who's been involved, say, in a crime of some kind is there. So we need to open our mind to the end outcome with regards to organ donation when we're treating patients like that, if we can. Okay? So I think we've one more question before we go.
In the case of double transplant, say if I can take pancreas and kidney, because pancreas is going to move to Vincent's, and kidney is staying in Bowen Hospital, how do you decide what hospital they take place in, and how will the care be effective for the patients?
Well, but I suppose it would depend on, you know, if the patient is sick with regards to their pancreas. It will look like the kidney team will probably go to Vincent's, but you know, currently Beaumont runs a system with Temple Street, so they can go in and they will obviously transplanting children in Temple Street, but they'll continue to go over back and care for the patients.
Thank you.
Last question from Trinity College with regards to gay people. Is there any restrictions on gay people giving organs? It's a serious question.
Well, no, I mean, no, but I suppose when you go to look at someone's health and lifestyle questionnaire, there obviously, every patient who is a potential donor has virology taken. So if you have someone who has been, and this is not as regards gay people now, this is people who are heterosexual as well or bisexual, if they've been promiscuous up to the period before that they ended up with maybe subarachnoid or they were in an RTA, there is a window of uncertainty in which you can stand over the virology that you get on the night. But sometimes that decision goes back again to the transplant centres to decide whether it's if you have someone who is going to die within 7 days if they don't get an organ, and they make that decision on the night.
I think that's very, very informative, and I don't think we can hold this lady any longer. So Karen Healy, thank you very, very much for giving us your time. The man up next, I have to say, his input into pre-hospital care in this country is amazing. I would literally say there's not one person in this room has come across a lesson or a lecture from this man before. It's a great privilege to have for OBICPC to have Ben Heron join us tonight, because it's because of a talk that he gave. Look, he thinks this is gas. It's because of a talk Ben gave last year or 2 years ago in the EMS gathering. Was the reason we asked him along. Well, I asked him along because what I learned on the side of a mountain, the side of Killarney, I'll never forget it, and I've brought it into my own practice as a paramedic, an advanced paramedic in Dublin Fire Brigade. So I think I'll give a big warm welcome, Ben Heron, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't know whether this is appropriate for FOMED, but I hate standing behind these things because I'm old enough to remember, what was it, Police Academy, the first. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Glen asked me to do this talk on sort of mountain medicine and wilderness medicine, and sort of just take various aspects that we can take from the mountainside or wilderness side to the roadside. Now, wilderness medicine is such a vast area that to try and cover all of it in a 20-30 minute talk is just not possible. So what we're going to do is just look at various aspects of it and so on, give a very, very brief overview of what's involved in wilderness medicine, where it's sort of versus street medicine. And as a street medic primarily, I know there are various aspects of it that we are absolutely really, really poor at, that the wilderness medics would bury us in, and vice versa. Okay, but there's huge areas, there's huge things that can be learned from both. And I just want to look at one or two of those things tonight. And if anybody has any questions, the usual rules, stop and ask and so on. I'm conscious of the time and so on. So what is wilderness medicine and so on? If we look at this, in the good old days, right, it was sort of bringing the hospital to the patient. And it wasn't really until sort of the 70s, the early 70s, where sort of street medicine started to really develop. And as a result of that development, the street medics and the paramedics that were coming along then were all involved in, well, they weren't all involved, but some were involved in outdoor stuff and outdoor pursuits and so on. And they very quickly realised that once you get out into the wilderness, that all the techniques and so on that we've been taught to use on the streets didn't actually work, and didn't work that well in a wilderness environment or in a mountain rescue environment or whatever you want to call it and so on. So the whole thing came about, and the hub of what wilderness medicine is about, and it's a huge subject. It involves research and development and all sorts of stuff, but the bones of it basically is providing the best available appropriate medical care, and appropriate is a really important word in that statement, okay, in the outdoors, remote locations and austere or challenging environments. And that just doesn't involve mountains. It involves deserts, jungle, disaster areas and so on. And disaster areas don't have to be out in the wilderness. If you have an earthquake situation, for example, that happens generally in a very urban setting. It can happen in a very urban setting, and that now becomes a wilderness. And the principles of wilderness medicine apply there equally as well, and sometimes provide much better basis for treatment and outcomes as a result of that. And then, of course, at the moment we have a lot of battlefield stuff going on and sort of hostile environments, so that type of medicine applies to this. Okay? Our standard training the standard training that we've all gone through as medics tends to concentrate on this environment. Okay, and this is our natural habitat as paramedics and EMTs and so on. So we're comfortable in it. We're really comfortable in it. Okay, and as a result, we're in that comfort zone. We perform really well in that comfort zone. Okay, so sometimes that sort of comfort zone gets a little bit stretched, right? And we have sort of fairly major situations to deal with and so on. But we tend to have adequate resources available to us. And because our training is based on this type of environment, we tend to cope really well with it. We also rely heavily on the supply of equipment and manpower. And when you look at an incident like this, while it's not the type of incident that you come across daily, thankfully, okay, look at the resources that are available. It's a multi-agency response. You've plenty of fire. There's no shortage of personnel, right? You've everybody involved, and it's a contained situation. And we perform really well in that, okay? So, what's the difference between this situation, take this, and the training that we've got, okay? And sorry, I knew that would happen. Apply it to this. So if you look at the two of these situations, right, the terrain in this particular one is not that hard. The previous slide that had to sort of come up well is just, it's a shot of the Coolan Ridge in Scotland. It's actually a beautiful place. If you ever get a chance to go and walk on it, take the chance. It's fantastic. Right? It'll scare the crap out of you, but it's fantastic, okay? Right, but look at this. Something as simple as coiling up a rope takes a huge amount of effort and is quite difficult. Right? So what makes those two situations different? What makes the street different from this? Okay, well, there's resources in it. What else is it? Environment. Is it one particular thing? It's not. No. Somebody here said location. It's not just about location. Okay? There's a huge amount of factors involved, and we look at some of those factors now. Okay? But at the end of the day, the ultimate goal of either situation, be it street medicine or wilderness medicine, is to provide the patient with the best possible, appropriate medical care that's available and to deliver them to here. Okay? In the best possible time frame, in the best possible condition that we can get them there in. Okay? So, some of us are lucky enough to work in environments like this that are warm and bright and clean and usually well staffed. Mind you, in current climates and so on, as people say, well staffed, right? But it's a much more controlled environment. Okay? So what makes it different? Okay? And what constitutes what we said earlier on, appropriate care? Is street EMS appropriate to wilderness settings? Or is the wilderness medicine and EMS procedures and so on appropriate to the street? And if anyone has ever done a wilderness EMT course anywhere in the world, you'll see this phrase, it depends. Okay? And all medicine at the end of the day, it depends. Okay, so what does it depend on? There's a multitude of factors that it depends on. Okay? So it goes beyond location. So let's just look at some of these. And these aren't in any sort of order of priority or anything like that. And there's people out there will say, oh, you didn't put this in, you didn't put that in, and so on. Because the list is endless, given the situation that you come across. One of the biggest problems that wilderness medicine is faced with is usually access to the scene. Okay, now, that can be sort of at the top of a mountain, at the bottom of a cave that's going to take lads 3 days to crawl into where the guy is because it's taken him 3 or 4 days to crawl in and he's trying to get back out before he gets injured. Or it can be in a ditch on the side of the M50 that has water filled between, a water filled ditch between the road and the patient with a fence, okay, a steep embankment and so on. So access to the scene is a huge element of it, okay? And wilderness medics and mountain rescue teams in particular pay a huge amount of time to cracking the access nut, and they train for the access nut all the time, okay? The terrain and access. The slide that you saw earlier on, if you hadn't seen the Coolin Ridge one, it's a fabulous area. It's all boulders, it's rock, it's alpine conditions in Scotland. It's brilliant. Okay, the flatter one, the terrain wasn't that severe, was it? What would make it different in that terrain, or what made that scene difficult, was the weather. True? Okay, so the time of day is an important factor as well in wilderness medicine. In street medicine, the only thing we worry about when it comes to time is it lunchtime, or is this going to bring me over the end of my shift? Right? That tends to be the only thing that we worry about time-wise, right? But in wilderness medicine and mountain rescue and so on, what time does the incident occur at? Is this in the morning, so I'm going to have the entire day to deal with it, and we'll deal with the incident in daylight? Is it just before dark? Okay, so we're starting off in daylight going into night. Is it night and going to come into daylight? Because all those factors determine the response and how we go about managing the incident, okay? Weather conditions plays a huge part. The weather now and the forecast. Usually all we worry about in street medicine in terms of weather is, am I going to get wet? Am I going to be cold or whatever, right? And we get out of the ambulance, and if it's cold, you go back in and you put your jacket on and you go back out again, okay? And that tends to be the situation. The fire guys, their turnout gear, they're roasting most of the time, right? In the winter, they're loving it. In the summer, they're hating it, right? So it's very important. With mountain rescue and so on, the weather here may be absolutely nothing like the weather where the incident is. So you might get out of the car and so on, or out of your Jeep, whatever form of transport you have, and it's a lovely sunny afternoon, and you climb a hill, and you're in fog, and it's windy, the whole lot, right, and it's freezing. So they're all issues. Available personnel, and this is a great one. It's not just the amount of people that you have available to you, it's the skill set is really important as well. And that same thing applies to street medicine. So when we're dealing with a situation, what's the skill set of the individuals that we have? Do we take it into consideration? And I know, working for one particular organisation, that there is a lot of animosity develops at times and in various locations between other groups and other sort of individuals and so on that have a particular skill set that we need for this particular incident, and you don't want to talk to them. And they don't want to talk to you either, okay? Right? But at the end of the day, you have to talk to each other because it's all about the patient, okay? The equipment that we have available, right? Generally speaking, rescue teams and so on are limited to the amount of equipment they have because the bulk of it goes on your back. Now, I don't know too many people in this room that will be willing to take a Life Pack 15, okay, on their back and bring it to the top of Heron 2. Right? If any of the Kerry lads are looking in there, let me know who they are. We'll get you one, okay? Right? But it's generally limited. So you have to try and make your equipment fit the bill. So a piece of kit in wilderness medicine, generally you look for it to do various things. So your blood pressure cuff becomes a pillow, you know, it becomes a cushion. It takes your man's blood pressure. It's a tourniquet. It does a lot of stuff for you. Okay? Whereas on street medicine, if you forget a piece of kit, you walk back to the ambulance and you get it and you bring it out again. With wilderness medicine, if you forget a piece of kit, you generally have to just do without because you don't get it. Okay? And you manage without it. Okay? What transport is available to you? Now, your transport can go from something as complicated and as uncomfortable as these things to something as simple and reasonably more comfortable, right? And a lot of the time, it's more so these than the former. Okay, so you have to hump it. okay? And having to hump it means that you think very, very clearly and precisely about what you want to do and what you want to bring with you, okay? Communications is nearly always an issue, right? It's nearly always an issue. So your comms in wilderness medicine is usually quite poor, or it's quite restricted. It restricts your whole operation as well. If you have bad comms, you get bad information. If you have bad information flow, you make bad decisions. So getting access to good comms is really important, okay, and setting that up. And in street medicine, we tend not to have that issue, because if you can't get on the radio, somebody will take out their phone and make a phone call or whatever, okay? And it also limits your ability to contact the likes of medical direction and medical oversight and so on, if you need the backup. So comms is really important. Hazards available to you, or that are on the scene. Wilderness hazards range from everything from flash floods to avalanche to bears, you know, to wild animals, okay? We tend not to have that in street medicine. Now I can see a couple of lads sitting there saying there's parts of town I work in is full of wild animals, okay? But, you know, you need to consider those, okay? And also, and last but by no means least, a huge amount of this depends, it ultimately depends on the patient's condition and the capability of the EMS individuals and resources that we have available to us at that particular point in time. Anybody any questions so far? All happy?
Can I give you one?
You can. Quick one.
Quick one if I can find one here. Is Ben familiar with the intermittent CPR for hypothermic cardiac arrest victims to facilitate stretcher carries? What is his opinion?
I'll talk about that later on, okay, because it's way beyond the scope of a 20-minute talk, okay? It's a fascinating subject, right? Okay, but, okay, and if we talk about that now, we'll never get the rest of it. Okay, I'm not going to ask you I'm not going to ask you any more questions in the future. Okay, right, so, anybody that was involved in the recent floods of the Shannon, every one of those topics that we looked at earlier on in the previous slide for wilderness medicine and so on, they encountered both in the middle of towns and out in the rural settings. Every one of them. They were all there. Anybody else, anyone here involved in the floods and so on, in the Shannon? Yeah, right, am I telling lies? Exactly, right, okay, I don't tell lies.
Not live on national television anyway.
Often, okay. So we mentioned it depends. So what else does it depend on? What's the big it depends? Okay, the big it depends is all pre-hospital care, regardless of whether you're doing it on the streets or in the mountains or in a jungle or down a cave or on an island in the Philippines on a diving trip, whatever, right? It all depends on your ability to think critically, okay? Of critical thinking, right? It's all about it. You must weigh up risk versus benefit, okay? The easy part of pre-hospital care, the easy part is the airway management, the wound control, putting him on the stretcher, right? Bandaging up his leg, taking his blood pressure. That's the easy part. The hard part is deciding when it's appropriate to do it, and more importantly, when it's not appropriate to do it. Okay, so you'll get guys who are mad keen, full of all this education and full of a bag full of drugs, that want to give somebody a load of morphine because he's in pain. In the wilderness setting, it's extremely important that you rely on this approach to it, because the last thing you want to do is get somebody off their head on pain meds, right? And then you can't get them off the hill, right? Because they're staggered and so on, and you end up turning it into a major carry or whatever, okay? So it's all about risk versus benefit. And that applies equally to the street as it does to the hills. Okay? Will anyone disagree with that? A load of... Great, we're on a winner. We're on a winner here. Okay, keep going, keep going. Okay, so, in order to get that sort of thinking concept into your head, the standard treatment that we use and the training that we use doesn't always fit the bill. Okay? So what street techniques don't always suit the locations and so on, and wilderness medical training is designed to fill in those gaps. It's designed to give you that ability to think critically, because we can teach you to do that. You can be taught to do that, right? But the standard training doesn't really emphasise it to the point that wilderness stuff does, because your options in the wilderness are a hell of a lot less than they are on the streets. So you have to really think, and think hard about what you're going to do. Okay? So, what does it teach you? Well, it teaches you obviously specific conditions to wilderness medicine. So you're going to talk about altitude and HAPE and HACE and all that type of stuff, right? So you learn all that mountainy stuff and wilderness stuff. But what it really teaches you, okay, is patient assessment. Because your patient assessment is far more detailed, and it's a hell of a lot less reliant on equipment because you don't have it. So everything you do, everything we do in pre-hospital care should be based on what we have in our assessment. And if you don't do a good detailed assessment, you make bad decisions. So the easy part, we can train a monkey to intubate you. With enough bananas, we'll get a monkey and we'll train him to intubate you, okay?
We had that topic last month.
We won't be able to train him, okay, to think about when it's appropriate to do it and the consequences of doing it. Okay? So that's why your assessment is really, really important. The other thing about sort of rescue assessment, and particularly sort of mountain rescue and wilderness stuff, is there isn't generally, and I'm using the term generally, okay, the same urgency on getting the assessment started when you get to the patient. So the trauma handshake, you know, the don't move your head, you know, that's not as necessary, because most of the time, if the patient has survived long enough for you to get to them, another 3 or 4 minutes probably isn't going to make a huge amount of difference. So you use that 3 or 4 minutes to look at what's gone on, to take stock of the situation, and then to set up protection and environmental protections and so on that will aid ultimately the patient and the crew and so on that are there. Okay? So you don't have to run in the door, grab him by the head, don't move your head, quick head to toe, because if he survived 2.5 hours that it's taken you to get to him, another 3 or 4 minutes is probably not going to kill him. Probably. Okay? One of the big things that's sort of wilderness medicine pushed, okay, and very, very early on, the need to do accurate and detailed spinal immobilisation and spinal assessment as opposed to spinal immobilisation, because the consequences of not doing it were disastrous in a lot of cases. Okay, I started doing this in the mid-80s. Okay, we did the first wilderness EMT course was run in Ireland 20 years ago. Okay, and the American group that ran it had been running this course in the States. A guy called Keith Conover in Wednesday started in the States. He very quickly realised that they could take the nexus criteria and so on for C-spine clearance and for spinal evaluation and bring it out and teach EMTs to do it in the field. And as a result of good, detailed assessment and knowledge and education, people were able to avoid having to put somebody into this situation. Okay? Anyone that's ever been involved in a carry-out of a patient off a mountain will tell you, you won't do it with 5 or 6 people. You will, but it'll take you 2.5 days. Okay? And you'll all be wrecked. How many people are in that? Okay? There's 22 people there involved in that carry-out, and the 23rd is wrapped up getting rescued. Okay? So it takes a huge amount of people to do it. So your assessment is crucial to avoiding the necessity to do that, right? Without compromising the patient's safety. So a good assessment allows you to make good decisions. Happy enough? Lovely. Okay, great stuff. The other thing we always treat in wilderness settings is the 3 hippos. Okay? And the 3 hippos are hypothermia, hypoglycemia and hypohydration or dehydration. Where does that come into sort of the street setting? You get the little old lady who's living on her own, she's out in the back, she's been unwell for the last few days, you come into the house is roasting. Is she hypothermic? Yes, she is, but you can't figure out why she's hypothermic because the house is roasting. Okay, she hasn't been eating, she's dehydrated, she's hypoglycemic and so on. So wilderness medics are taught to look for that all the time and to treat it actively. To actively treat that all the time. All the time we do it, okay? The one area that mountain rescue and wilderness teams will educate the street guys is environmental protection, okay? Because there's a huge emphasis on it, a much bigger emphasis on it in the wilderness than there is in the streets, okay? And what I'll say to you is, how aware are we in street EMS of the effects of cold in our patients? Right? Most of us, right, aren't aware of it at all. How long does it take a patient to cool down after you expose and examine them? Since the advent of the shears, the trauma shears, okay? The first thing you bought when you became a new EMT was a trauma shears. Now you have a Leatherman Raptor, okay? Okay? You can go to town with a Leatherman Raptor, you know, okay? And everybody just wants to cut all their clothes off, okay? How many of us routinely record a temperature in a trauma patient? Most of the time we don't, because we have them all wrapped up with head blocks stuck on a board or on a vacuum mattress or whatever, and then we realise, Jesus, we haven't taken their temperature. And you can't get at their ear because we're all carrying tympanic probes now. There's nothing else available now, right? So you don't record it. And is it important? It's really important. I want to show you a small video. This was filmed in the Cairngorms. It's part of the BBC series. Okay? Hopefully it'll run.
Hello and welcome to Earth Unplugged. We're here at Mar Lodge in the Cairngorms in the Eastern Highlands of Scotland for Winter Watch. We're filming with the Selex Merlin, a military spec thermal imaging camera that can capture heat as it's lost from my body. When wrapped up warm, you can see I'm only losing heat from my face and my hands when I remove my gloves. This shows up as red. This is when it gets serious. My previously insulated chest starts to rapidly lose heat as it's exposed to the freezing conditions. Animals that call these mountains home have adapted to minimise heat loss by insulating their bodies with feathers or fur to allow them to survive in such bitterly cold winter conditions. Humans, on the other hand, need to wrap up in warm clothes to prevent hypothermia, which can be deadly in these conditions. Notice how the snowball is dark blue because it's so cold. As I press my cold hand against my chest, I'm cooling my skin, which is shown as a blue hand mark. The spots on my skin are caused by falling snow hitting my body and cooling it down. This thermal imaging camera allows you to vividly see how cold conditions can be so perilous. Check out more from Winterwatch by using the hashtag Winterwatch on Twitter, and don't forget to subscribe to Earth Unplugged for new videos every week.
It's amazing, isn't it? That video clip
Hello and welcome to
is
Earth
about 2.5 minutes long.
We're here at Mar Lodge in the Cairngorms in the Eastern Highlands of Scotland for Winterwatch. We're filming with the
Selex. Off his jacket. He starts to cool down. Now, I want you to think about that the next time you're out at night, up a little laneway somewhere, okay? It's raining, and you have your Raptor in your pocket, okay? And you have no means of wrapping him up, or you don't even consider wrapping them up because you want to get down to skin, because we're all trained. Get down to skin, expose and examine. Okay? So when do we expose and examine? It depends. Okay? And it depends on a lot of factors. So you need to think. That critical thinking that we're talking about, guys. Okay? So, if your trauma patient is cold, don't make them any colder. Okay? Remember a thing called the lethal triad. Anyone here know the lethal triad of trauma? Bet you Stephen O'Neill knows it, right? Ooh. Yeah. Go on. Yeah. Acidosis. Okay, so acidosis, hypothermia and coagulopathy. A lot of big words there, okay? So, there's three things that we as street providers never, or wilderness providers, never ever want a trauma patient, a serious trauma patient to be. Okay, the first one is hypoxic. Because if they get hypoxic, we let them become hypoxic, they become acidic. And they develop acidosis. If they develop an acidosis, they won't clot. If they're hypothermic, their blood doesn't clot. And if they're profoundly hypotensive, and I mean profoundly hypotensive, okay, they don't perfuse well, you don't perfuse well, you become acidic, acidotic, you don't clot. Right? So don't ever allow your trauma patient to get cold. And certainly don't make him any colder than he already is when you get him. Okay? So one of the first things you should check with him on your trauma patient when you do your ABCDs and so on is a temperature. Check their temperature. Are they cold? Because cold patients, there's lots of research and so on, proves that patients who are really cold, that turn up in emergency departments and so on, if they can't rewarm them and they're severely severely sort of deep trauma, serious trauma patients, they die. A lot of them die. Okay? Because they can't clot. Right? So, insulation. This is where wilderness and mountain rescue teams leave us street medics standing. The kit and the money that they spend on the kit to insulate their patients is phenomenal. If you ever get to see a mountain rescue, they have CAS bags and all sorts of stuff, right? They're fantastic, right? Really, really good at insulating patients. And they place a huge emphasis on it, and they do it very, very quickly. So what have we got in the streets? We have blankets, okay? Remember that if your patient is lying on cold, wet ground, it simply conducts the heat out of them. So you need to insulate them from the ground quickly. And one of the best tools that most of us are carrying now for insulating patients from the ground is a vacuum mattress. Whether you're going to spinally immobilise them or not, get them on a vac mattress. It's a fantastic piece of insulation. And when you put them in the vac mattress, put a blanket in the vac mattress on the vac mat first. So when you wrap them, there's a layer, an insulation layer between the material of the vac mat and the patient's skin. So it helps to insulate them. So it's really, really good. There's a very old saying, and it's the science behind it, I don't know. It's probably one of these things that was invented, or somebody came out with the saying millions of years ago, and we've all decided it's there, but one layer underneath is worth 3 layers on top. Right? And if you've ever lay down doing patient, right, for mountain rescue teams and so on, anyone that puts that insulating mat underneath your butt, okay, and gets you off the ground, you'd have their babies for them. Okay? Okay? So, get them insulated. The next thing that we all love to do now are fluids. Okay? The big thing now, give them loads of fluids. And we're giving them loads of fluids now. Why? Because we can. Right? Do they need it? Probably not. And in a lot of cases, they don't. But we give it because we can. Okay? There's a bag of fluid. Right? That came in out of a car 2.5 hours ago. Okay? Glen, what's it feel like?
Cold.
It's freezing. Okay? It's freezing. The recommendation, depending on which paper you read, in relation to fluid temperature, is somewhere between 38 and 42 degrees. Now, it was a little experiment during the week, because I knew I was doing this talk, so I got my colleague up there to go out and oversee this. I got a highly technical thermometer, external, internal thermometer, which was bought in Lidl, okay, right? And we took a temperature in the hot box in 2 ambulances that we have in the station. One of them, the temperature was 37.5 degrees, which was great, and the other one, it was 50.2 degrees was the fluid, okay? One is going to burn the hell out of you, and the other one's going to be nice and comfortable, okay? The point I'm trying to make is, if you're going to give fluid, think about it, right? And if it's cold fluid, are you doing the patient any benefit? What's our target for fluid in trauma? So people will say to you, it depends, and it does depend, okay? Depends again on which paper you read, right? Your CPG says systolic, palpable radial pulse or systolic at 90, okay, thereabouts. The general advice that you'll get from most of the trauma guys coming from Afghanistan and Iraq and so on is, if you have a palpable radial pulse, leave it alone. Get your lines, okay, have access and so on, so you can give fluids and so on if you need be, but if you have a palpable radial pulse, leave it alone. Doesn't matter what the figure's saying, leave it alone. And it makes sense. You know, there's probably a load of people out there in Twitter world and so on are going to go, oh, their heads are spinning at this stage and the phone's going to start hopping, okay? Phone's going to start hopping, right? But generally think about it. Before you go putting loads of fluid into somebody, you don't want to get his blood pressure up, because if you haven't got control of the bleed, he's going to bleed. You'll blow the clot. If you make him cold, he doesn't clot either. Okay? So think seriously about fluids, about cold fluids before you go there. Okay? And then shelter. Develop shelter for them. Sorry, just before we go on. A little trick, by the way, right, that the wilderness lads will show you in relation to fluids is, if you have a bag of fluid, okay, usually it's cold. If you're going to bring fluids to the hills, which is, and most guys don't carry loads of fluid. Why? Because they're heavy. You have to put them on your back. A litre of fluid weighs a kilo. You have enough crap on your back without carrying 2 or 3 litres of fluid that somebody just might need. When if he needs fluid, generally speaking, you can give it to him orally and rehydrate him that way. Sometimes, not saying always, okay? The little trick that you will see being used is they put the fluid inside their jacket, they run the tubing down through their own arm or down through the patient's arm, and then use a hot pack. Simple little hot pack, but we all carry them, right? And wrap the tubing very close to where the patient is, or to the IV site, in the hot pack. So if it's cool, right, it picks up the heat from the hot pack. And if you want to run that through later on, you'll see it picks up the heat, and it's a lot warmer than it will be in the bag. If you have the bag at the right temperature, because it's in this range and so on, putting the hot pack on it down close to the patient helps to keep it and reduce the cooling effect as it runs down through the tubing, because if it's windy and so on, it will cool down very, very quickly. So just small little tricks to think of, okay? The next one that we use all the time, right, and the mountain rescue lads out there are dying to see this because they've never seen it before. They use this all the time, okay? It's a thing called a kishu, right, or a boti. And all it is, where's my, come on, you've used this before, if you wouldn't mind. Come on, Glen. Okay, you've used this before. Marie, if you wouldn't mind.
I carry one now, actually.
Yeah, wouldn't mind yourself. So what is this? It's a shelter, right? The lads will take it out there while I'm talking. And it's a simple little lightweight piece of nylon. So, and that's a 12-man one. Okay, and you throw it over yourself, but you just cover yourself in it, so everybody gets into it. Okay, all in. Okay, and the rest of the lecture will be done from in here. So you climb in there, okay, and everybody climbs in, and you're sheltered. Does it interfere with managing the patient? No, it doesn't. Because you have your patient all well wrapped up and so on. This is over the top. And you have plenty of protection. Small little experiments that we do regularly with WEMC and so on when we're training is we look at the outside air temperature and then we put the tissue up and see what the temperature rises to inside the tissue. And generally speaking, within about 15 minutes, it's gone up by about 5-6 degrees. Now 5 or 6 degrees, when your butt is cold, is a huge amount, okay? And the longer you're in it, the better it gets. And if it's sunny outside, it gets even warmer. So can we use that on the streets? Anyone see an advantage for that on the streets? I was at an RTA on the M3 just before Christmas. It was a 4-car RTA. There was 4 patients needed transport. And of course we all got there, and while we were waiting on the last ambulance to arrive, the final patient, the roof had been cut off the car, he'd been extricated, he was immobilised, and we were waiting. And there was hail showers throughout the whole thing. We were freezing. There's an individual sitting here whose hands didn't work after about 10 minutes, and I won't say who it was because I get more into trouble. Okay? But the patient was getting really cold, despite the fact we had 3 blankets over him and the plastic sheeting that the fire service used to cover the patient while they're doing the extrication. This type of thing would fit, and would have fit perfectly over the car, right? It also protects you from the iPhones, okay? Which is a fantastic thing. So if you have to expose your patient or anything like that, this type of thing provides great protection and privacy, okay, as well as insulation. And there's nothing worse than standing around, waiting, freezing, getting wet, when you could be in there, snug as a bug in a rug, okay? Happy enough? Okay, so that's what it looks like inside them. So just to summarise for this evening, what does wilderness medicine bring to street medicine? And what's the difference? The big difference, primarily, as far as I'm concerned, is it relies on principles rather than protocols. And if you have a good understanding of the principles of what we're trying to achieve pre-hospital, it's far more important than having a knowledge of a load of protocols, because protocols don't always fit the bill. And if you just know the protocol but you don't know the principle, the patient loses out, because it's about the application of principles. Okay? Critical thinking. It teaches you to think outside the box. Right? What am I going to do? Risk versus benefit. Thorough assessments gives you the ability to make better decisions. Okay? And awareness of the effects of the environment on your patient. That's what I want you to take away from tonight. If you take those points away, I'll be a happy man. Okay? We've just scratched the surface of what is rapidly becoming a specialty in itself nearly, okay, which is wilderness medicine. And it's not just about mounted rescue. It's a massive, massive field. Okay? If anybody wants to get involved in training, here's the plug, okay? Get about there. You can get in contact with Ireland at WEMCinternational.org and so on. I think it's a great course, right? I'm plugging it, okay? It's there. And there's my references for this evening's talk. Anybody, any questions?
Questions? Comments? Points to make? So
I've used that hot pack trick a few times in Dublin. Hot boxes don't work.
Yeah. And hot packs on the patients. They're not hot packs as such, they're heat packs. If your patient is cold, warm them. Get them warm. If you've a serious trauma patient, don't let them get cold, because they die. Okay? They die.
Fred?
Just going back to the use of the tissue on street medicine. You're saying you use it when you're involved in RTA, confirmation, like that. Would you have to use then something else then to cover up the jagged parts of the car and stuff like that? And just because it's a piece of equipment and they're likely to rip very easy, you're then incurring more and more expense. And then discourage management from actually bringing on board something like that.
At the moment, we don't use that pre-hospital.
I know.
Well, we don't use it in work, okay?
Do something like that, yeah.
I am advocating using it because I think they're a smashing piece of kit.
So do I.
Okay?
Use it.
You're not going to use it every day of the week. It's one of those situations, those of us who are involved in sort of rural stroke urban EMS, right, the ambulance service and so on, and it tends to be the National Ambulance Service because the fire brigade have the, you know, the easy part, they have the city, okay?
Don't forget that.
I'm joking, don't start the war, okay? Right, you go to a farm accident, right, so you've a farm...
We have them in Dublin as well, you know.
Yeah.
That's great.
I won't say where though. You have farm accidents and so on, so you end up across two fields and you're waiting to get this patient extricated, right? It's ideal, right? In a farmyard, in a back garden while you're waiting on help in a slashing rain. You know, the RTA is great because you've cut everything off. You know, you're not going to use it in that situation because straight off, because it's in the way. But if you're waiting, it's there, right? You're probably just as well to wrap the patient up in a load of blankets, right? Make sure there's a blanket covering them. Don't go cutting all their clothes off and then sit there and wait and let them get cold because you're sweating. You know, you're in the back of the ambulance, it's warm, the heating's, you know, the heating's probably not on because you don't want to be too hot because you have your gear on. So you're comfortable. If you're comfortable in the heat, he's freezing. He's broken up and he's lying there and you've cut all his clothes off. He's cold and he's getting cold, right? But you don't feel it, so you just need to be aware of it. Be very aware of it. Rescue teams are really aware of it.
I had it in Dublin, and I had a girl who came off a bike and just in the middle of making her comfortable because she couldn't be moved for pain relief perspective, ambulance pulled up, reversed up, the two back doors were open, the ambulance straight away losing any heat from the back of the ambulance itself, and out of nowhere this hailstorm just came out of nowhere. And we were standing there with blankets basically, and it was after doing Ben's talk the previous week, or the previous couple of months before that, I went out and bought one, and I carry it now in a small kit bag that I have, because you'll just never, it's like Ben says, you never know when you need it, but you know you'd prefer to be looking at it when you do need it to be able to use it, and it's as you use yourself. It's excellent. Anybody else? No? Okay, so just going to the Twitter sphere. Alan Batt said, I think anywhere can become a remote given the right circumstances. Look at what happened, look at what Katrina did to New Orleans. If you're stranded in the wilds of Connemara in bad weather, it's wild. It depends on conditions. Ben will be again holding a master class at this year's EMS gathering. Register now as soon as you can.
Thanks to be clear on Henry.
No, it's me. I'd imagine common given, right, there's a discussion going on between Owen and somebody else at the moment. Jason Heron, very well handled when you got questions put to you about the cardiac arrest. You handled that answer extremely well, so hello to Jason. Jason Heron is one of our CFR doctors who's based out in Mayo, who recently set up and has publicised some of his statistics recently, and the work he's doing down there as a CFR doctor is huge and should be recognised by everyone. I think the CFR people and the ambulance service down in Mayo welcome the sight of Jason's lovely car flying down the road because he's doing some great work down there.
He's also heavily involved in WEMC, by the way.
People involved in recent floods in Athlone witness the same conditions as wilderness medicine, weigh up the risk versus benefit. This is just some of the stuff, so just there's just some questions here, 1 second. There's plenty of monkeys still doing intubation in Dublin.
Not just Dublin.
Not just Dublin, everywhere. Self-education. Wilderness medicine becoming more standard to RNLI, mountain rescue, etc. Different training standards. There's so many different training standards out there, and it seems to be one of the deficits with WEMC that we have this wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience of dealing with mountain rescue and hypothermia and all the different things we talk about, trauma, but yet there doesn't seem to be any coming together of it. So from a training perspective, and a couple of people have mentioned that as well. And in the middle of your talk, the water rescue actually came in, and half of the group in Waterford had to leave because they had to go down to do a water rescue. So they're very grateful for the bit that they got, and I told them they can watch it back if needs be. Just there is some. What he's saying is, what we've been taught: keep it simple, know your patient assessment, and take time if needed. Think ahead and be proactive. Kiss you best piece of kit that can be involved. Warm fluid. So there's not many other questions coming in. Oh, one of the questions that came in from Dublin Airport was, if you're putting together your kit at the start of your shift with the stuff that you've been thinking about, what are the main things you consider when you're trying to put together your kit? Because we're all arriving up and we're checking our kits, and as you say, we're getting ready to go into a house, but if we need that, we just walk outside. But if you're in the middle of arriving to a scene where you have to walk 20 or 30 yards, what are the key pieces of equipment that you think should be taken in and possibly out?
It depends.
Ben is also running for election in the next...
No, I think, right, for those of us in street medicine, and I have to say it galls me at times, because occasionally you work with people who step out of the ambulance and they'll walk to a scene with one arm as long as the other, right? And I think that's madness. If you're going to something, particularly when you don't know what you're going to, you should be prepared to deal with the worst case scenario. So what should you have? You should have your resus kit. You should have the ability to look after somebody's airway. You should have the ability to ventilate them. You should also have the ability to control a big bleed. Okay? And they're the big things. And then obviously the ability to take your set of vitals. Right? So that's what you need, putting your kit together, walking in. Now you can turn around and you can say, well, you know, what about this and what about that? And there's loads of stuff you have. There's any amount of stuff. I mean, you go to some guy's car, you'll open up the boot of his car and you'll take out this bag and you'll be like a tortoise. You know, if you end up on your back, you just won't get off your back with it, right? And you'll see the other guy has an airway, a pocket mask, you know, a dressing in his
Mark
pocket,
Dixon has a scale on that. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
Where he puts the amount of years you've actually joined the service on the bottom to the number of items on your tool belt. And the more you go up in the years of service, the less items start to appear on your tool belt.
Well, there's a fella not a million miles away, he ended up with an umbrella on his tool belt one night. Okay, without knowing. Okay, so yeah, it's a good question. The stuff that you need to get you through if the poo has hit the fan.
The poo has hit the fan. Very good. So Nicola Kong, would you believe, who is an avid phone med and has his own podcast, and he's out in the he's one of the heads in the Royal Flying Doctors in Sydney, is looking in and is saying, great talk, and has retweeted, I'd like to see more practitioner skills in remote Ireland. This was tweeted by Alan Batt and Owen Connolly. I'd like to see more practitioner skills in remote Ireland, ultrasound, minor injuries treatment, etc. There's a few coming in, but I think that's generally. Oh, Jason Horns just come in and said, now back to your opinion on intermittent CPR. We'll leave it there, folks. I think we all got something out of that talk as well. So Ben Heron, thank you very, very much. So that being said, folks, I think I'm going to bring the night to a close. It's been a great night, some great speakers. I hope you've enjoyed it. Your certs will be all out short in the next couple of weeks. If you haven't received any certs for any of the previous talks, let me know. We're hoping, as you're probably aware, the next talk will be in June. What's coming to June around the same time is the biggest critical care conference in the world, called SMAC, Social Media and Critical Care. They are presenting they're doing a huge week-long of a conference down in the Keys down there in the National Centre. I'm hoping to do a kind of a tribute band type thing where we'll get some of the speakers to come in and speak in here. That's the plan for the next session in June. There's some really good guys coming over that I've linked in with on through phone med circles, and we're hoping to get some of the best international speakers on critical care, pre-hospital care and medical. But I think from my perspective, one of the success stories tonight was Katie Cooper, who came in and gave her talk, and as I said, there's no better way of learning about medicine than directly from the horse's mouth. So safe home to everybody. Thanks everybody for watching in. Keep supporting OBICPC, #OBICPC, and I'll see you all again soon. Be safe out there. Thanks a lot.